Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the assembled delegates of the Galactic Scientific Congress, her heart racing with the kind of nervous excitement that came from presenting a decade of research to the most brilliant minds in known space. The auditorium on Theta Station stretched before her, filled with beings from 47 different species, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that still amazed her even after 5 years working in xenobiology. "This," she said, gesturing to the holographic display showing a young girl hugging a golden retriever, "demonstrates the evolutionary advantage of cross-species bonding in human development. The emotional regulation, the empathy training, the psychological benefits, all stemming from our capacity to form meaningful attachments beyond our own species." The presentation had gone well. She could see it in the approving gestures of the Thetian delegates, the curious antenna twitches of the VR researchers. But in the back row, she noticed something that made her smile falter for just a moment. 3 Dravix corporate representatives, their crystalline exoskeletons gleaming under the station lights, were recording everything with an intensity that seemed unusual for what should have been a straightforward academic presentation. Sarah pushed the thought aside. She was being paranoid. This was science, after all, pure research. What could possibly be concerning about discussing how humans love their pets? 3 months later, she would remember that moment and curse her naivety. The news reached Earth on a Tuesday morning, which seemed inappropriately mundane for the end of humanity's place in galactic civilization. Ambassador Marcus Webb sat in his office at the United Nations Galactic Affairs building in Geneva, staring at the legal documents that had just been transmitted from the Galactic Court of Sentient Rights. His hands, steady through 40 years of diplomatic service and 3 interstellar conflicts, trembled as he read the filing. The Hegemonic Resource Collective, a corporate entity so massive it controlled the economies of 17 star systems, was challenging humanity's legal status as a sentient species. Marcus had seen many things in his career. He had negotiated trade agreements with beings whose thought processes were so alien that communication required 3 layers of translation. He had watched as humanity took its first uncertain steps into a galaxy far older and more complex than anyone had imagined. But this was unprecedented. The case was built on the Dravix standard, a legal framework that had defined sentience for 3,000 years. According to the filing, humans failed to meet the criteria in several critical ways. They formed emotional attachments to non-sentient creatures. They made decisions based on feelings rather than pure logical analysis. They engaged in self-sacrifice for non-kin with no genetic or resource-based justification. They prioritized irrational concepts like loyalty and compassion over optimal outcomes. In short, the Dravix standard argued that humans were sophisticated animals, not true sentient beings. Marcus immediately understood the implications. Under galactic law, non-sentient beings had no rights, no property ownership, no legal protections, no representation. They were resources to be managed as any species saw fit. The HRC wanted to own humanity. The trial lasted 4 months, and every moment of it was broadcast across the galaxy. Marcus led Earth's defense personally, assembling a team of the finest legal minds humanity could offer. They brought philosophers to testify about human consciousness and self-awareness. They brought scientists to demonstrate human achievements in mathematics, physics, and art. They brought historians to show the complexity of human civilization spanning millennia. The prosecution, led by a Dravix advocate named Zalthex, countered every argument with clinical precision. Yes, humans created art, but so did certain bird species on their homeworld. Yes, humans had complex language, but language alone didn't indicate true sentience. Yes, humans had built civilizations, but instinct-driven social animals like insects did the same. And then there was the emotional argument. Zalthex played video after video of humans acting irrationally. A firefighter running into a burning building to save a stranger's cat. A soldier throwing herself on a grenade to protect her squad. A father working 3 jobs to support children who shared only 50% of his genes. A couple adopting orphans from a war-torn colony they had never visited. Observe, Zalthek said, his translated voice flat and emotionless, how humans consistently make choices that defy logical self-interest. They suffer, they sacrifice, they mourn over beings that provide no evolutionary advantage. This is not sentience. This is sophisticated instinct, no different from a mother animal defending cubs that aren't her own. Sarah watched the trial from Theta Station, her research suddenly feeling like a weapon turned against her own species. Every paper she had written about human empathy, every presentation about emotional bonds, every celebration of what made humanity unique, it was all being used as evidence of their inferiority. She wasn't alone in her horror. Across human space, people watched with growing dread as the trial progressed. The Galactic Court consisted of 7 judges representing different species. 4 were from species with close economic ties to the Dravix. 2 were supposedly neutral. One, a Thescian named Korzeth, had openly expressed admiration for human culture. It wouldn't be enough. The verdict came on a gray morning, appropriate for the death of hope. Chief Judge K. Valix, a Dravix himself, delivered the opinion in the flat, emotionless manner his species considered the hallmark of intelligence. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this court finds that while humans demonstrate tool use, communication, and social organization, they fail to meet the Dravix standard for true sentience. Their inability to separate emotional responses from logical decision-making, their irrational pack bonding with non-sentient life, and their tendency towards self-destructive empathy indicate a sophisticated animal intelligence rather than true sentience as defined by galactic law. The court rules 5-2 that humanity does not qualify for sentient species status and therefore does not merit the legal protections thereof. The 2 dissenting votes came from Judge Korzeth and a VR judge named Clicks 3 times. Their written dissent argued passionately that the Dravix standard was culturally biased and that emotional intelligence represented a valid form of cognition. Their words were eloquent, thoughtful, and legally meaningless. The ruling triggered automated protocols embedded in 3 millennia of galactic law. Human representatives were immediately expelled from the Galactic Council. All treaties between Earth and other species were voided. Human-owned property outside the Sol system was seized under eminent domain provisions. Human colonies became unprotected territories, open to corporate claim. Marcus Webb had 12 hours to evacuate the UN Galactic Affairs building before galactic peacekeeping forces arrived to dissolve Earth's government. He used those hours to make dozens of encrypted calls, activating protocols that he had hoped would never be necessary. As he watched the first peacekeeper ships enter Earth's orbit, massive vessels belonging to the Korthax species, he allowed himself one moment of despair. Then he buried it deep and focused on survival. The occupation of Earth happened with brutal efficiency. The Korthax were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were peacekeepers, maintaining order across the galaxy, and they approached Earth with the same clinical detachment they would use for any mission. Human military installations were identified and neutralized within the first 72 hours. Nuclear arsenals were seized or destroyed. Resistance was met with overwhelming force justified under dangerous animal control protocols. Commander Thrak led the ground forces securing London, and he found the experience deeply unsettling. He had participated in dozens of peacekeeping operations across 17 different worlds, but something about Earth was different. The humans fought with a desperation that defied tactical logic. They would hold positions that should have been abandoned. They would sacrifice themselves for no apparent strategic gain. They ambushed his forces from rubble, from sewers, from the burned-out husks of their own homes. In his 300 years of military service, Thrak had never seen anything like it. When his forces cornered a human resistance cell in a collapsed building, he expected surrender. Instead, the humans fought until their ammunition ran out, then fought with improvised weapons, then fought with their bare hands. When the last one fell, a woman who had taken 17 rounds and somehow kept moving, she smiled at him through broken teeth and said, "More are coming, we don't stop." Thrak had her body removed respectfully, which earned him confused looks from his subordinates. He couldn't explain why. She had been an enemy combatant, an animal by legal definition, but something about that smile haunted him. While Earth burned, humanity scattered across the galaxy faced different fates. Some human colonies were seized by corporations looking for cheap labor. Others were purchased by wealthy individuals as exotic servants or curiosities. A few were simply expelled, their residence dumped on marginal worlds with minimal supplies. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself on Varkith Prime, a Dravix industrial world, property of hegemonic biotech solutions. The corporation had purchased the entire research station where she worked, and she along with it. Her new owner was Director Zalthex, the same advocate who had prosecuted humanity in court. He seemed to consider this either ironic or fitting. Sarah couldn't tell which, and suspected he didn't understand the distinction. Zalthex was not cruel by his species standards. He provided Sarah with adequate housing in the facility dormitories, sufficient nutrition, and even some personal items from her old quarters. He treated her better than he would have treated laboratory animals, which was precisely the problem. She wasn't beaten or starved. She was simply property, as much a tool as the computers in his laboratory. He put her to work doing what she did best, xenobiology. Specifically, he wanted her to help develop genetic modifications that would make humans more suitable for various labor roles, increased muscle density for mining operations, improved radiation resistance for reactor maintenance, enhanced docility for domestic service positions. Sarah complied because she had no choice, but she also because she was planning something. The facility's computer system was sophisticated but not omniscient. Late at night, when she was supposed to be sleeping, she explored its networks, learning its architecture, looking for weaknesses. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found the classified files buried deep in the corporate archives. The Dravix had done this before. 6 times over the past 2 millennia, the hegemonic resource collective had brought similar legal challenges against other species. Each time, they had successfully argued that the target species failed the Dravix standard of sentience. Each time, that species had been stripped of legal protections. And each time, within a few generations, that species had gone extinct or been reduced to tiny, scattered populations, their homeworld strip-mined, their cultures erased. Humanity wasn't a victim of legal philosophy. They were the target of calculated genocide dressed in jurisprudence. Sarah copied everything she could find, encrypting it and hiding it in obscure corners of the network. She didn't have a way to transmit it yet, but she would find one. She had to. 2 weeks later, a human janitor at the facility made contact with her. His name was Michael Torres, and he had been a major in Earth's special forces before being captured and sold. He had been playing the role of simple manual labor for 3 months, learning the facility's layout, identifying other humans, and building a resistance cell. "We have 17 people," he told her in whispered Spanish during a brief moment in a supply closet. "Not many, but enough. We have access to some tools, basic weapons we've improvised, but what we really need is information. Can you get us into their systems?" Sarah could, and she did. Over the following weeks, she fed Tor's cell everything they needed to know: guard rotations, security protocols, communication frequencies, and most importantly, the location of other human prisoners in the facility, including 12 children being held in a medical research wing. But she gave Tor something else too: copies of the files she had found, the evidence of the Dravix's genocide pattern. "If we're doing this," she told him, "we're not just escaping. We're making sure everyone knows what they are." While resistance cells organized on dozens of worlds, Marcus Webb had made his way to Outpost Persephone, a military installation hidden deep in the Kuiper Belt that the peacekeepers hadn't discovered. There he found Admiral Helena Vasquez and the remnants of Earth's deep space fleet, 30 warships that had been on long-range patrol when the occupation began, plus 3 experimental vessels that officially didn't exist. It was a fraction of Earth's full military capability, but it was something. More importantly, it was mobile, and Vasquez had kept it that way, constantly moving, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. "We can't take back Earth," Vasquez told Marcus bluntly. "Not with what we have. The Cortex have 200 ships in orbit and more on the way. Direct assault would be suicide. Then what do you propose? Marcus asked. Vasquez smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We make it too expensive to keep us. The HRC wanted humans because they thought we'd be profitable. Free labor, easy to control. We're going to prove them wrong. The campaign began a week later. Vasquez's fleet didn't attack military targets. They hit economic infrastructure. Automated mining facilities using human labor destroyed. Corporate research stations, data stolen, facilities gutted. Trade routes disrupted by fast hit-and-run attacks. The fleet moved like ghosts, appearing without warning, striking hard and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Every attack followed the same pattern. Vasquez would identify a facility or operation using human slaves. Her ships would jump in, destroy or disable the facility, extract any humans they could, and leave. Sometimes they killed peacekeepers or corporate security. Sometimes they just destroyed equipment. Always, they cost the HRC enormous amounts of money. Simultaneously, across the galaxy, humans engaged in systematic sabotage. Mechanics who accidentally caused critical system failures. Scientists who corrupted research data. Laborers who worked slowly, inefficiently, destroying tools and materials through apparent clumsiness. None of it was obvious enough to prove deliberate, but all of it was costly. The HRC had expected human slaves to be profitable within the first quarter. Instead, they were bleeding resources at an accelerating rate. Shareholders began demanding explanations. Competitors began circling. The Dravix economic model depended on efficient resource extraction, and humans were proving to be the least efficient resource in galactic history. But it was Chen's discovery that changed everything. When she finally transmitted the classified files to Tors, he immediately understood their value. This wasn't just about humanity. This was about proving a pattern. This was about showing the entire galaxy what the Dravix really were. The breakout from the Varkith Prime facility was carefully planned. Tor's cell had grown to 23 people, and they had spent months preparing. They didn't just want to escape. They wanted to make a statement. So they planned their move for the exact moment when a galactic news feed was scheduled to do a feature on the facility as an example of humane treatment of subsentient laborers. The first sign that something was wrong came when the facility's main power grid failed. Emergency backups kicked in, but they were already compromised. Within minutes, Tor's team had seized the security center and the communications array. They didn't shut down the news feed. They took it over. Chen appeared on screens across the galaxy, standing in a laboratory surrounded by rows of cages containing human children connected to monitoring equipment. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with controlled fury. "My name is Dr. Chen," she said. "I am a xenobiologist, a citizen of Earth, and according to the Galactic Court, I am not sentient. The beings you see behind me are human children, aged 6 to 14, being used to test genetic modifications. According to galactic law, this is not a crime. According to galactic law, this is resource management." She held up a data pad. "I have evidence that the Dravix Hegemonic Resource Collective has used this same legal strategy 6 times before. 6 species were ruled non-sentient using the Dravix standard. All 6 are now extinct or nearly so. This is not about legal philosophy. This is genocide with paperwork." The broadcast continued for 17 minutes before peacekeeper forces stormed the facility. Tor's cell fought a running battle through the corridors, buying time for the message to spread. 14 of them died, including Tors himself, who held a choke point long enough for Sarah and the children to reach an extraction shuttle that Vasquez's fleet had sent. As Sarah's shuttle jumped to FTL with peacekeeper ships in pursuit, Tors made his last stand. He was out of ammunition, badly wounded, and alone. A Korthak squad closed in on him, weapons raised. Their commander, a young officer named Thrak, recognized him from security footage. "Surrender," Thrak ordered. "You have fought well." "There is no shame in survival," Tors laughed, blood on his teeth. "You don't get it, we already won. The message is out, everyone knows now, and they'll come for you, all of you." He died still laughing, and Thrak found himself disturbed by the man's certainty. He had seen zealots before, had fought religious extremists and ideological radicals, but this was different. Tors hadn't died for a belief. He had died for a truth he knew would outlive him. The broadcast had exactly the effect Sarah and Tors intended. Within hours, it had spread across the galactic network. The evidence of the Dravix's pattern of genocide was irrefutable. Images of human children in cages shocked even species that had supported the court's ruling. 3 of the supposedly neutral species on the Galactic Council suddenly realized how close they had come to being targeted by similar legal challenges. Public opinion, which had been largely indifferent to humanity's fate, began to shift. Protests erupted on several worlds. Young members of the Thessian Assembly marched demanding a retrial. VARC universities published papers challenging the validity of the Dravix standard. Even some Dravix, particularly younger ones who had grown up exposed to galactic culture, began questioning their own species' actions. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions that devolved into shouting matches. Some members wanted to double down, arguing that letting humans win would undermine 3,000 years of legal precedent. Others pushed for compromise. 3 species formally threatened to withdraw from the council entirely if the human ruling wasn't reconsidered. While the council debated, the situation on Earth deteriorated further. Commander Thrak had been reassigned from London to New York, and he found the resistance even more intense. His forces were losing soldiers daily. Supply lines were constantly disrupted. The humans had learned to use the bombed-out cities as hunting grounds, turning urban warfare into a bloody nightmare. Then came the incident that would change Thrak forever. His squad cornered a resistance fighter in a collapsed subway tunnel. She was a woman in her 40s, armed with a rifle and a pistol, both nearly empty. She had fought them for 2 hours, killing 3 of his soldiers, wounding 5 more. When they finally closed in, she was out of ammunition and bleeding from a dozen wounds. Thrak expected her to surrender or fight to the death. Instead, she checked her communicator, smiled, and said, 20 minutes, they're safe now. Who? Thrak asked. Who is safe? The children, 200 of them hiding in a shelter 3 blocks from here. I led you away from them. I bought them time to evacuate. She died before he could respond, still smiling. Thrak stood there for a long moment, looking at her body, thinking about Tors, about the countless humans who had fought and died not for tactical advantage, but to protect others. His entire military career had been built on the principle of logical strategy, of calculated risk versus reward. These humans defied everything he thought he understood about warfare. That night, he accessed the classified files Sarah Chen had transmitted. He read about the 6 extinct species. He read about the pattern of genocide. He read about the economic motivations behind the court case. And he made a decision that would have seemed irrational by Dravix standards. He contacted Admiral Vasquez. The message was simple. I am Commander Thrak, Korthak's peacekeeping forces, Earth Theater. I wish to defect. I have intelligence on peacekeeper positions, supply routes, and human prisoner locations. I offer this freely with no expectation of reward. What is being done here is wrong. I will not participate further. Vasquez, suspicious of a trap, nevertheless met with Thrak in secret. What she found was a career soldier suffering a crisis of conscience that his species barely had words for. He gave her everything, knowing full well it meant execution as a traitor if he was caught. When she asked him why he was doing this, he said something that she would remember for the rest of her life. I have watched humans die for 3 months. They die protecting strangers. They die for concepts like honor and justice that have no tactical value. They die smiling because they saved someone they loved. My species abandoned such things long ago in the name of efficiency. We called it evolution. But watching you, I wonder if we evolved in the wrong direction. The Dravix standard says humans aren't sentient because they feel too much. But perhaps true sentience isn't about cold logic. Perhaps it's about knowing when to defy logic for something greater. With Thrak's intelligence, Vasquez planned her most ambitious operation yet. Her fleet would jump directly to Earth, engage the peacekeeper forces, and buy time for a coordinated uprising by resistance forces across the planet. It was incredibly risky. The peacekeepers outnumbered her 6-1, but humanity was running out of time and options. The attack came at dawn on a Monday. Vasquez's fleet materialized in Earth's orbit without warning, immediately engaging the peacekeeper forces. The Korthax were caught off guard but recovered quickly, their superior numbers beginning to tell. It should have been a short battle ending in humanity's last fleet being destroyed. But Vasquez hadn't come to win a conventional battle, she had come to deliver a message. As her ships fought and died, she broadcast on all frequencies, addressing the Galactic Council directly. "I am Admiral Helena Vasquez of the Human Defense Force. You ruled we aren't sentient. You decided we're animals. Very well. Let me show you what this animal can do." 3 of her ships broke from the engagement, including the experimental vessel Prometheus. They jumped before the peacekeepers could pursue, their destination not hidden. They were heading for the Dravix homeworld. Vasquez continued broadcasting. "The Prometheus is equipped with stellar destabilization technology. In 72 hours, it will reach your sun, counselors. It will demonstrate just how advanced this animal intelligence really is. We demand the immediate withdrawal of all peacekeeper forces from Earth and the release of all human captives. In return, we will agree to a new trial with truly neutral arbitration. Refuse, and we show you what humans are willing to do when you back us into a corner." It was partially a bluff. The stellar destabilization technology was experimental and highly unstable. It might work. It might explode the moment they activated it. But the Dravix didn't know that, and neither did the rest of the Galactic Council. Panic erupted in the council chambers. The Dravix demanded military intervention, but none of the other species were willing to risk their ships trying to catch the Prometheus. The technology was human-designed, based on principles most species barely understood. Even if they caught the ship, there was no guarantee they could stop it. More importantly, the other council species suddenly faced a terrifying precedent. If they allowed the Dravix to continue this genocide, what would stop them from being next? And if they tried to help the Dravix, they might be destroyed along with them if the Prometheus worked as advertised. On Earth, resistance forces struck simultaneously across the planet. With Thrax intelligence, they hit command centers, supply depots, and communication hubs. The peacekeeper forces, already demoralized and now politically abandoned, began surrendering in large numbers. Thrak himself appeared on broadcast urging his fellow Korthax to stand down. "We were told this was a peacekeeping operation," he said. "We were told we were protecting the galaxy, but I have seen what we are really doing. We are not peacekeepers. We are accomplices to genocide. I will not follow these orders any further." His words resonated with other Korthax soldiers who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the Earth occupation. Within 48 hours, half the peacekeeper forces had mutinied or deserted. The occupation was collapsing from within. The Galactic Council, faced with the potential destruction of the Dravix homeworld, humanity's spreading resistance and growing civil unrest across dozens of worlds, had no choice. They agreed to Vasquez's terms. Peacekeepers would withdraw from Earth. Human captives would be released, and there would be a new trial with neutral arbitration. The Prometheus turned back, its experimental weapon untested. Vasquez would never confirm whether it would have actually worked. The second trial convened 6 months later in a new courtroom with new judges. The old judges who had ruled against humanity were removed, replaced by arbiters from species that had explicitly opposed the original ruling. The Dravix, their economy shattered by human resistance and their homeworld having faced extinction, had lost most of their political influence. This time, humanity didn't just defend themselves. They prosecuted the entire system. Sarah Chen, now free and testifying as an expert witness, presented the evidence of the 6 extinct species. She showed the pattern of genocide, the economic motivations, the calculated cruelty. But she also presented something else. Extensive research demonstrating that the Dravix themselves scored poorly on several measures of intelligence that didn't align with their cultural values. "The Dravix standard isn't about measuring sentience," she explained to the court. "It's about measuring how similar a species is to the Dravix. They created a test that valued their strengths and dismissed their weaknesses, then called it universal. Humans fail the Dravix standard because we have emotional intelligence they lack. But by that same logic, the Dravix fail the human standard because they lack empathy, creativity, and adaptive reasoning. She let that sink in for a moment. You want to know what true sentience is. It's not cold logic, it's not pure emotion. It's the ability to balance both, to understand when logic should prevail and when compassion matters more. It's the capacity for moral reasoning, for art, for sacrifice, for love. Humans have all of that. We've demonstrated it repeatedly, even when it cost us everything. What more proof do you need? Ambassador Marcus Webb, returned to his role and grayer than he had been a year ago, delivered the final argument. He didn't ask for humanity to be recognized under the Dravix standard. He demanded the standard itself be abolished. For 3,000 years, the galaxy has used a single species definition of sentience as universal law, he said. That was a mistake, and it cost 6 species their existence. We propose a new framework, the Compact of Cognitive Diversity. It recognizes that sentience takes many forms. Some species excel at logic, others at emotion. Some at individual problem-solving, others at collective intelligence. All are valid, all deserve protection. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the courtroom. But understand this. We're not asking for permission. We're offering partnership. If this court refuses, humanity will withdraw from galactic society entirely. We'll keep our systems, our technology, our weapons. We'll trade with species who recognize us as equals, and we'll defend ourselves against any who don't. We didn't survive your genocide to beg for scraps. We're offering you a chance to do better, to be better. Choose wisely. The new court deliberated for 2 weeks. When they returned, the ruling was unanimous. The original decision was overturned. Humanity was recognized as fully sentient under a new legal framework that acknowledged multiple forms of intelligence. The Dravix standard was officially deprecated. The Compact of Cognitive Diversity was adopted as the new galactic benchmark. Reparations were ordered on a massive scale. Corporations that had enslaved humans were dissolved, their assets distributed to victims. The Dravix hegemonic resource collective collapsed entirely. Individual Dravix weren't punished. The court recognized that many had simply followed their culture's teachings, but their political and economic dominance was permanently broken. 5 years later, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the same auditorium on Theta Station, where she had once given a presentation that inadvertently started a war. But now she was Director Chen, head of the newly established Galactic Institute for Cognitive Studies. The Institute's mission was to study the full spectrum of sentience across all known species, to ensure no species would ever again be judged by standards designed for another. Michael Torres stood at the back of the room, head of the Institute's security division. He had survived the Varkith Prime breakout, though badly wounded, and had spent years recovering. Now he made sure Sarah and her researchers could work safely. The galaxy had learned its lesson mostly, but there were still groups who resented humanity's victory. Earth had recovered, though scars remained. Cities rebuilt. Populations returned. But memorials dotted the landscape, remembering the millions who died in the occupation and resistance. A massive monument in New York bore the names of every human who had died fighting for their species' right to exist. It was 3 kilometers long. Admiral Vasquez had retired, though her fleet became the core of the new human defense force. Humanity maintained the 3rd largest military in the galaxy now, and no species dared challenge them. The Prometheus had been decommissioned, its stellar destabilization technology locked in classified archives. Probably. Vasquez never confirmed or denied whether working versions still existed. Commander Thrak lived in Vancouver, having been granted asylum on Earth. He worked as a liaison between humanity and Korthak's reformers who were trying to reintroduce emotional reasoning into their species' culture. It was slow work. Millennia of cultural evolution toward pure logic couldn't be undone quickly, but Thrak was patient. He kept a photograph in his home, the resistance fighter who had smiled knowing she had saved children. He looked at it every morning as a reminder of what he was working toward. The galaxy had changed in fundamental ways. Species that had been overlooked or marginalized were being reevaluated under the Compact of Cognitive Diversity. New species were being discovered and welcomed as equals rather than categorized by standards that didn't fit them. The Galactic Council had expanded to include 23 new members, representing forms of intelligence previously dismissed, but everyone understood the real reason for these changes. The compact existed because humanity had made the galaxy too afraid not to change. Species didn't embrace diversity out of moral enlightenment. They embraced it because they had seen what happened when humans were cornered. They had seen the resistance, the sacrifices, the willingness to destroy everything rather than accept subjugation. Humanity had proven they would rather die free than live as property, and they had nearly taken the galaxy with them in the process. In an interview on the 5-year anniversary of the court's reversal, a reporter asked Ambassador Webb if humanity had forgiven the galaxy. Marcus, now in his 70s and finally allowing himself to show the exhaustion he felt, considered the question carefully. Forgiveness is something you give to those who ask for it and mean it. The galaxy didn't apologize. They recalculated the cost-benefit analysis and decided recognizing our rights was cheaper than fighting us. That's not apology, that's accounting. He smiled slightly. But we're not holding grudges. We'll work with the galaxy, trade with them, even call some of them friends. We've learned that most individuals are better than their governments, but we'll never forget what happened. We'll never again let anyone else define what we are, and we'll never, ever allow ourselves to be vulnerable like that again. The galaxy learned we're sentient. We learned we can't trust them to protect us. Both lessons were expensive. The interview ended, but the reporter's camera kept recording as Marcus walked away. He stopped at a memorial wall in the UN building, running his fingers across names carved in stone. People he had known. Friends, colleagues, strangers whose only crime was being born human during the wrong decade. A young human child, no more than 6, approached him with her father. She was holding a small dog on a leash, some mixed breed with floppy ears and a wagging tail. She saw Marcus touching the wall and asked, in the innocent way children do, "Why are all those names there?" "They're heroes," Marcus told her gently. "They fought so you could have a future." "Did they win?" she asked. Marcus looked at her, at the dog she was hugging, at the father who watched with protective love. He thought about everything humanity had lost and everything they had saved. "Yes," he said finally, "they won." The little girl smiled and hugged her dog tighter. An alien observer, a Thessian diplomat Marcus knew slightly, approached and watched the scene. "After everything," the Thessian said quietly, "humans still bond with animals. That nearly destroyed your species." Marcus nodded. "That's what they thought, but it wasn't our weakness, it was our strength. We see something vulnerable, something that needs protection, and we choose to care for it. We choose to love it, even when it's not logical, even when it costs us." "That makes you dangerous," the Thessian observed. "That makes us human," Marcus replied. "And that's enough." The little girl and her father left, heading home through a city rebuilt from ashes, walking past memorials to those who died, ensuring she could do simple things like walk her dog without fear. She didn't understand the significance yet. Someday she would learn about the trials, the occupation, the resistance. She would learn what her species had endured and what they had done in return. She would learn that the galaxy had tried to make humans into property, and discovered instead that humans would burn the galaxy down before accepting chains. She would learn that sentience isn't about being perfectly logical or purely emotional. It's about the capacity to choose, to care, to sacrifice for ideals that have no survival value, but all the meaning in the universe. She would learn what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had tried to decree they were something less. And she would grow up in a universe that had learned, at terrible cost, that humanity would never accept another species' definition of their worth. The galaxy had ruled humans weren't sentient. Humanity made sure they would never judge again, not through conquest but through demonstration. They showed the galaxy what sentience really meant: the courage to stand against annihilation, the stubbornness to resist impossible odds, the love strong enough to sacrifice everything, and the wisdom to build something better from the ashes. And in the end, the galaxy learned that humanity wasn't just sentient. They were unstoppable, Because nothing in the universe is more dangerous than someone who has decided they would rather die free than live on their knees. That was the lesson written in memorial stone across Earth and in the reformed laws of the Galactic Council. That was the truth every species now understood. Humanity had been tested by the cruelest measure imaginable, and they had not just survived. They had transformed the galaxy in their image, not through force, though they had proven they possessed it, not through conquest, though they had demonstrated they could achieve it, but through the simple, stubborn insistence that emotional beings who loved too much, who sacrificed too freely, who bonded with creatures they gained nothing from, deserved to exist, that their way of being sentient was just as valid as cold logic and calculated efficiency. The Dravix had built their standard on the assumption that emotion was weakness. Humanity proved that emotion was strength. Not despite their capacity for love, but because of it, they had survived what should have destroyed them. Years passed. The Institute for Cognitive Studies published groundbreaking research on dozens of different forms of intelligence. Species that had been considered borderline sentient were reevaluated and welcomed into the galactic community. The compact of cognitive diversity became more than law, it became philosophy, fundamentally changing how species understood each other. But humanity never forgot. Every human child learned the history in schools. They learned about Dr. Sarah Chen broadcasting from a laboratory full of caged children. They learned about Michael Tors holding a corridor so others could escape. They learned about the resistance fighters who smiled as they died because they had saved someone. They learned about Admiral Vasquez threatening to destabilize a star. They learned about Commander Thrak choosing conscience over duty. These stories became humanity's new mythology. Not tales of gods and monsters, but of ordinary people who refused to accept that caring made them less than others. Parents told their children about the trials the way previous generations had told stories of ancient struggles. The message was always the same. Never let anyone tell you that your capacity for love is weakness. The Human Defense Force became one of the most respected militaries in the galaxy, not for its aggression but for its restraint. They had proven they could destroy, but they chose to protect. They defended not just human interests but any species threatened by the kind of genocide that had nearly consumed them. When the Hive, an extragalactic threat, emerged 3 decades later, it was humanity who led the defensive coalition, and species that had once enslaved humans fought under human command. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The species deemed too emotional to be sentient became the ones others turned to in crisis. Because in the end, pure logic said to run to save yourself, to abandon allies when the cost grew too high. Humanity had never been good at pure logic. They stayed, they fought, they died for others, and somehow, impossibly, they won more often than they lost. Sarah Chen, now in her 60s, watched a new generation of researchers at the Institute. They were a mix of species, humans working alongside Dravix, Corthax, Thessians, and dozens of others. Her assistant was a young Dravix named Kelvar, who had been born after the trials and grown up in a society trying to reckon with its past. "Director Chen," Kelvar asked one day, his translated voice carrying genuine curiosity, "do humans still resent my species for what was done?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Some do. Trauma doesn't vanish just because laws change, but most of us understand that you aren't responsible for what your ancestors decided. You're trying to be better, that matters." "I have been studying human history," Kelvar continued. "Your species has committed terrible acts against each other. Wars, genocides, oppression, yet you overcame these." "How?" "Slowly," Sarah said, "painfully, with many setbacks. We're not perfect, Kelvar, we never claimed to be. We just claimed we were sentient and that we deserved the chance to improve. The same chance we're giving you." Kelvar's crystalline exoskeleton shifted in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of deep thought. The Dravix standard taught us that emotion was illogical, therefore inferior, but watching humans, I have come to believe logic without emotion is incomplete. My species pursued efficiency so ruthlessly that we lost the ability to recognize suffering. We need to relearn what you never forgot." Sarah smiled. "That's why you're here. That's why the Institute exists. We're all learning from each other." In Geneva, the UN Galactic Affairs building had been rebuilt, larger and more secure than before. Marcus Webb's office had a window overlooking the memorial gardens where names stretched across manicured lawns. He was retired now, but he still came to the office occasionally, advising the new generation of diplomats. His successor, Ambassador Chen was young, brilliant, and had been a child during the occupation. She brought a perspective Marcus valued. She remembered the trauma but wasn't paralyzed by it. She could work with other species without the reflexive distrust Marcus still felt sometimes. "They want us to mediate a dispute," Chen told him during one of his visits. "The Quellan and the Vexther have a territorial conflict that's escalating. They're asking for human arbitration." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The Vexther?" "The hunting species that tried to declare open season on humans 20 years ago. The same. They've since been brought into the compact and they've agreed to cease hunting sentients. But old habits die hard for them. They respect strength, though. They respect us." "Because we made them," Marcus said quietly. Chen didn't disagree. Humanity's response to the Vexther had been swift and brutal. When the hunters had abducted human explorers for their preserves, Earth's Hunter Corps had demonstrated what humanity's own predator heritage meant. The Vexther had learned that humans were pursuit predators from a death world, and they had underestimated what that implied. The incident had ended with the Vexther suing for peace and requesting membership in the compact rather than face extinction. "Will you help with the mediation?" Chen asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes. But not because I've forgiven them. Because someone needs to make sure smaller species don't become prey again. We learned that lesson in blood. We won't let others learn it the same way if we can help it." That was humanity's role in the galaxy now, not conquerors, not victims, but watchdogs ensuring the strong didn't prey on the weak, that no species would face what they had faced. It was exhausting, thankless work, but it was also profoundly human. They had been saved by their capacity to care about others, and now they extended that protection as far as they could reach. On Earth, in a small town in Japan, a monument stood that tourists often missed. It was simple, a bronze statue of a woman holding a child with a dog at her feet. The plaque read, "To all who loved when it wasn't logical, to all who sacrificed when it didn't make sense, to all who proved that caring is not weakness, you saved us all." Veterans of the resistance would sometimes visit, old men and women now, their fighting days long past. They would stand before the statue in silence, remembering friends who hadn't survived, remembering the days when humanity's existence hung by a thread, remembering the choice they had all made, to fight for the right to love freely. Commander Thrak, now quite elderly by Korthak's standards, visited that monument once a year. He would stand there for hours, meditating on the choices he had made, the species he had betrayed to serve a higher principle. Other Korthaks called him traitor still. He wore the title with pride. His people were slowly changing, allowing emotional reasoning back into their culture, but it was glacial work. He wouldn't live to see his species fully transformed, but he had planted seeds. The woman who died smiling in the New York subway would never know that her sacrifice inspired a Korthak's commander to change sides. The children she saved, now adults with children of their own, would never meet her. But her legacy lived on in the memorial walls, in the stories told to new generations, in the very existence of humanity as a recognized sentient species. Admiral Vasquez, in her retirement, wrote a memoir that became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. The final chapter was titled "The Bluff That Changed Everything," and in it, she finally admitted that the Prometheus's stellar destabilization technology had only a 30% chance of working. She had been willing to gamble humanity's last fleet, her own life, and the lives of thousands on a coin flip because surrender wasn't an option. "People ask if I would do it again," she wrote. "If I would risk everything on uncertain technology and a desperate gamble, the answer is yes. Because the alternative was accepting that humans were property, and I would rather die trying to prevent that than live one day under that reality. That's not bravery, that's not heroism, that's just being human." Her memoir sold across the galaxy. Other species read it trying to understand the psychology that had driven humanity's resistance. Some found it inspirational, others found it terrifying. Both reactions pleased Vasquez. Let the galaxy understand that humanity could never be subjugated because they would rather cease to exist than accept chains. The Galactic Council, now expanded and reformed, held ceremonies marking the anniversary of the Compact's adoption. Speeches were given about unity, diversity, and mutual respect. Politicians from dozens of species congratulated themselves on their enlightened philosophy. It was all very civilized and diplomatic, but everyone knew the truth. The Compact existed because humanity had shown the galaxy what happened when you pushed a species to the brink. It existed because humanity had been willing to destroy the Dravix homeworld, to shatter the galactic economy, to burn everything down rather than submit. The politicians could dress it up in pretty words about moral progress, but the foundation was fear. Fear of what humanity would do if threatened again. Humanity didn't mind. They had learned that being feared was safer than being loved. Love could turn to indifference. Fear stayed sharp. In the end, the question of whether humans were truly sentient had been answered not by legal arguments or philosophical debates, but by simple demonstration. Humans felt. Humans cared. Humans sacrificed. Humans created art and beauty and meaning from chaos. Humans looked at a universe that told them they were animals and said, "Then we'll be animals who choose our own destiny." The galaxy had tried to make humanity kneel, and humanity had refused. That refusal, that stubborn insistence on dignity and freedom, that willingness to fight impossible odds for an ideal, that was sentience in its purest form. Dr. Sarah Chen, in one of her last lectures before retiring, summarized it perfectly. The Dravix standard said we weren't sentient because we loved our pets, because we cried at sad stories, because we sacrificed for others without calculating benefit. They were wrong. Those things aren't evidence against sentience. They're the highest expression of it, because true sentience isn't just thinking, it's choosing what to think about, it's not just feeling, it's deciding what's worth feeling for. We choose to love, we choose to sacrifice, we choose to care even when it costs us. That's not weakness. That's the most powerful thing any being can do. 50 years after the trials, a new species made contact with the galaxy. They were nervous, uncertain, technologically primitive by galactic standards. The Galactic Council convened to decide how to categorize them, what tests to apply, what standards to measure them against. Humanity sent a single message: they're sentient, welcome them. When asked how humanity could be so certain without extensive evaluation, Ambassador Chen replied, "They reached for the stars, they built civilization, they create art. That's enough. We won't let another species prove their worth by nearly dying for it. Once was enough." The new species, called the Myrani, were welcomed without trial, without testing, without having to demonstrate they met some arbitrary standard. The Compact had changed everything. But it was humanity's moral authority, earned through suffering, that made the decision final. That was humanity's legacy, not conquest, not domination. But the insistence that every being capable of wonder, of creativity, of love deserved recognition. They had saved themselves, and in doing so, they had saved the galaxy from its own cruelty. The memorials on Earth stood testament to the cost. Millions of names carved in stone. But those names meant something now. They meant that no species would face what humanity faced. They meant that the galaxy had learned, painfully and expensively, that sentience came in many forms and all deserved respect. And if any species ever forgot that lesson, if anyone ever again tried to declare another being non-sentient for their own profit, they would face humanity. Not humanity as victims, but humanity as guardians, armed with the memory of their own near extinction, wielding the moral authority of those who survived the unsurvivable, backed by a military that had proven it would rather destroy the galaxy than see another genocide. The Galactic Court would never judge humanity again. But humanity would judge the galaxy, holding it to the standard of compassion and dignity that they had fought for. And the galaxy, having seen what humans would do when judged unfairly, had learned to welcome that judgment. Because in the end, the species that loved too much, that felt too deeply, that sacrificed too freely, had proven they were not just sentient. They were the conscience the galaxy had been missing, and the universe was better for it. That was the story told across the stars. The story of humanity's trial and triumph. The story of how caring became strength, how emotion became power, how the capacity to love became the foundation of a new galactic order. And every human child, hugging their pets, making friends across species lines, choosing compassion over cold logic, carried that legacy forward. They were living proof that their ancestors had been right. That being human, with all its messy emotions and irrational attachments, was not just enough. It was everything.